So good morning to you all. Today we're going to do exercise 123, and as I said last class, we're going to do it slightly out of the normal order of things, in that we're jumping ahead into SketchUp and then we'll jump back into finishing up our AutoCAD drawings. And as I said, the due date for assignment 105 gets pushed by one class day. So it's due the Monday before Thanksgiving break. So today's actually going to be split into two parts. The first part I'm going to show you some, we'll call them tips for working in SketchUp. Most of you are already very, very familiar with SketchUp, and I used to spend a lot more time in the semester talking about how to actually model in SketchUp, but so many of you now know SketchUp without me talking about it that it seems redundant for me to go into too much detail about SketchUp. So I'll spend the first 10-15 minutes today talking about some of the tips for working in SketchUp, trying to be a little bit more organized, etc. Then you guys will work to build the Francis Ching Cube House, which is on your handout. It's also online. There's a picture of it if you need to blow it up. Very standard modular house based on blocks. We're assuming that the standard size of one of these little cubes is 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. So essentially you can count up the number of cubes and essentially make the house. When you get to the bulk of the house being kind of put together, feel free to embellish it and change it. It can end up being rather boring to have all the same houses. So go ahead and have some fun with it and play around with it. Then at the end of class, I will walk you through some of the steps for how do we get our first output out of SketchUp and make it look a little bit better in the world of using Photoshop to make it look a little bit better. So that'll be towards the end of today. Like I said, you'll model for the bulk of the day. I have to step out, as we talked about last class. I'll be gone for an hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours. She is, a lot of you have her in other classes. She's going to step in for me and answer any questions you might have, though modeling in SketchUp rarely involves too many questions, if we're being honest. So my guess is that you guys will be just fine. But that she will be here to answer your questions. She'll get here about 8:30 or so. So I wanted to talk through kind of the basics of SketchUp a little bit, give you a few tips on how to use it. The first thing is when you get the Welcome to SketchUp screen, do make sure that you click on the little template drop down here at the bottom. And since we're going to be working in architectural design feet and inches, you might as well pick that template. Does it really matter if you pick the simple template instead of the architectural design? No, not really. But for our purposes, the architectural design is a little cleaner, so we'll go ahead and use that template. Once I have that selected, I'll go ahead and say Start using SketchUp. And I will get the SketchUp interface to pop up. Now, we here at school have SketchUp Pro. There's very few differences between SketchUp Pro and the free version of SketchUp that you can download on your home computer. The other really nice thing is that you are free to work on the free version, and when you open it in the Pro version, nothing's different other than you get the Pro features. So when we work with some of the other programs, especially AutoCAD, and you get watermarks and stuff on the page, in SketchUp, there's no fear. You're more than welcome to open it on your home computer. The only thing that we run into sometimes is what the current version of SketchUp is and whether it lines up the lab computers to your home computers. I think we're still on SketchUp 2016, both for what you can download and for what's on the lab computers. But that can fluctuate a little bit and can be a little bit problematic. So this is the SketchUp interface. I, by default, have something called the large tool set enabled, which is over here on the left side. You may or may not, in the default setup, have that enabled. You may just have the tool set across the top here. If you go to always have to double check. If you go to View and then Toolbars, you can check the box for Large Tool Set, which will show up, which will cause this toolbar to show up on the left. I find the Large Tool Set to be much more useful than even the Getting Started toolbar at the top, though I tend to leave it up there anyway. But they're a bit redundant in terms of what they have. But go ahead and enable the Large Tool Set. So once again, that was under View, Toolbars, and check the box for Large Tool Set, and that'll put this on the left side here on your screen. Okay, so by default, SketchUp always includes a person, and this person varies depending on what version of SketchUp you have as to what's created. First thing to do, go ahead and select her, and then press the delete key on the keyboard and get rid of her, because we don't need her. Okay? So now we're going to go ahead and start building our first little block that represents this building. As I said, the blocks are 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet tall. So I'm going to start using the large tool set, and I'll pick the rectangle tool. And when I pick the rectangle tool, right, I'm going to start drawing at a point. And if it's a square, there will be a point at which we get a little line and it'll say square. Okay, this is a little guide for our purposes. But it's very difficult to get it to be exactly the size that we want. So instead, if you look down here at the bottom right corner, there's something called dimensions, right? And so a lot like AutoCAD, I can actually type 4 feet, comma, 4 feet. And remember, the foot sign is an apostrophe. If I type 4 feet, comma, 4 feet, and then hit Enter, I will get a 4 foot by 4 foot rectangle, or in this case, a square. Okay? Now, one of the things that's important for you to recognize is that the world of SketchUp, because it's in perspective, oftentimes skews objects. So yes, this is a square, even though it looks like a rectangle. If I were just drawing it and I were trying to draw a square, right, that looks kind of more square-like. But if we orbit and look at it, it's not a square, it's a long rectangle. So it's a little bit difficult to visually see what you're drawing. Better to rely on your key commands under your dimensions here. So now that I have this square, I'm going to go ahead and use the push-pull tool. It's available right there. It looks like a box with a little arrow pointing up on it. I'll use that push-pull tool, and I'm going to pull this up to create the cube. Now, once again, if we look in my lower right corner, I can specify a distance value. So I'll type in 4 feet and then hit Enter. And now I have a cube that is 4 feet. Okay? One of the things that happens, though, with SketchUp is objects get tied together. So if I were to, say, select this object, edit, copy, oops, sorry. Let me select it, edit, copy, edit, paste. Okay, I can drop these two together. Notice the snap still exists, just like in AutoCAD. It's snapping to endpoint right there. Okay, that's great. But now if I go to move this object again, it's attached to that first object. You guys see how that works? Okay, SketchUp automatically glues things together. Just like if you divide a particular shape, it will automatically divide it. And so instead, before I copy and paste this, I'm going to select the cube. I'm going to right-click on it and say Make Group. And when I make this cube a group, and then I edit, copy, edit, paste, and I drop those two together, if I go to move it again, it stays separate. They're not glued together anymore. So it's much easier to make these a group when we're working in this. So I'll go ahead and work my way across. Now, one of the shortcuts that you can use is if you use the Move tool, which is right here, the four-sided arrow. Okay, it's also right here. Like I said, these are redundant toolbars. And I press the Control key. You can see my cursor changes. So right here, I have just the plain cursor. You guys see the cursor? But when I press the Control key, see how I get a little plus sign? Okay, this means it's going to copy what I'm moving rather than just move it. So I'll go ahead and snap right here, and then I'll continue. Again, I can press the Control key, and we can move our way out. Okay, so I need 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, now that I have all of those together, we can select all of them. We'll use the Move tool again, and this time we'll copy going backwards. There's 1, 2. Oh, there's 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so I was able to very quickly make this base grid. It is, in fact, 8 by 8, but the 8th one is a tiny little piece that juts out. So I'm just going to copy these two pieces. I'm going to hold down Shift to select both objects. I'll use Move, press Control key, and we're going to move it out to there. So I end up with just those pieces. Okay? I could have created this whole grid and then deleted the groups that I didn't need, but there was no reason to do that. So now I'm going to use the Orbit tool to zoom in just on these pieces. Now if we look at the actual Qing cube house here, this front little piece that pops out is a half of a cube diagonally on both of those. So I need to create that. Now here in SketchUp, if you use the line tool, you can actually divide a face so that these are two separate pieces. And so I'll draw that little triangle there. I'll hit the arrow key to finish. Now this didn't get divided by this line because it's a group. So the first thing that I have to do if I want this surface to be divided is I have to right-click on the object and say Explode, which will then explode the object into individual faces. So you see now that this line divided this surface into two parts, where here it's still one part. So let me right-click on this one and type Explode. And now this is divided into two faces. So I'll go ahead and I'll delete this, and I'll delete this. We can delete the fronts here. And I'm just pressing the Delete key to do this. And I need to draw, with the line tool, a diagonal line there. I also need to draw a diagonal line there. And see, in SketchUp, whenever we complete a rectangle or a triangle, it automatically fills a surface in. Okay, so now that I've divided that and I've created those, we can delete these other pieces. Let's get rid of those two. And then we can delete the lines that made the surface to begin with. All right, so I've done that little piece that pops out. Now I need to do this little ramp at the end, which is 3 pieces. So I'll use very much the same strategy here. I'll use the line tool, and I'll go down across these 3 faces there. I'll come back to the line tool, and I'll do the same thing on the back edge, like that. Now I can't see it just yet, but when I select each of these and right-click to explode, I can start to build these up. So now that they've exploded, the front surface is divided, and we can go through and start deleting. So we'll delete, 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 delete the tops. There we go. Now I want to divide this to there, and I want to divide this to there. And then I can go in and delete that piece, and that piece. So a few more pieces to delete. Oops. Like that. And now I have the ramp that goes down on this side. So do you guys see how I build these up? When we get a little bit further along in this process, there are some other size pieces. So there's a 2 by 2 cube that's used. There's a 1 by 4 cube. Or it's not a cube, it's a rectangle. So there's a variety of pieces. If you look carefully at the windows, there's little offsets that have been done. I'll show you an offset just so that you can see it a little bit. Though I don't actually have the, actually I'll tell you what, let's take, let me take a few of these here, and I'm going to use the Move tool, hold down the copy, go back to Move, and I'm going to go up with them, and up with them. OK. Sorry, I have to go back and double check. Oh, it's only 2 wide. So we can get rid of these on the edge. OK, so now this, I had 2 by 2s divided. So we'll go ahead and divide this there and there. Let me go ahead and explode these. I'm going to hold down Shift to select them all. I'll right-click and say Explode. That divides these surfaces. I can join surfaces back together by pressing the Delete key on just the lines. So if I delete those lines, this is now one surface. Okay? So let me go ahead and delete these there and there. And now I have one big surface right there. And I could divide these up a little bit further so that I had the sides like that. There. Oops. There. Like that. Okay. Now I talked about using the push-pull tool before, but in this case, maybe I want that piece to go backwards. So I can use push-pull, and I can actually push this surface backwards into the building. So maybe it goes into the building 2 feet, and now I have that surface there. So I've made the surface one surface, then I pushed it back into the building. Now I want to offset it to represent the door that's inside. And I don't know, this might be a little bit tall, but I at least want to show you this. So I'm going to use the offset, which is right here. Sorry, this one. It's the arcs. I'm going to use offset on this surface. And as I click and drag, you see that I get a distance of the offset. So I could say maybe 4 inches. And it then divides the surface and offsets the line that goes around the surface. I could then use push-pull. I could push this back maybe 2 inches and have a little bit of depth to that particular door, just like it does there. Okay, and again, I'm kind of making it up a little bit. Looks like this was only 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the 5th one goes across the top. So in my case, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one should go across the top. So I made a mistake when I was actually modeling it. The door is taller than it should have been. Okay? You guys can spend more time actually counting up the pieces. So anyway, I just wanted to show you kind of how the offset works. Remember, if you work with the groups where you have the blocks that you can build up, it will make your life a lot easier. Only explode them when you're ready to divide them up. So I could continue and I could divide these up on the sides to create those other divisions like this. Okay? When you get to the sloping pieces on the roof, it works the same as it does here. Okay? So you're going to work today to build this little cube house. Remember, you're free to embellish it in any way that you want. Okay? So you'll work for the next hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours, and then I'll sit you down and we'll go through kind of how to make a good output and how to collage it in Photoshop, and we'll go from there. Okay? So I'm going to split the lecture. You guys have time to model, and then I'll come back and we'll go through the rest. Chi is here. Thank you. So if you have questions, she'll be in the back, and she can answer them without a problem, though it is SketchUp, so I don't think you'll have any questions. All right? OK, so as I said, we split the lecture. This is the second half, and I want to talk. It sounded like from Chi, some of you already got to these steps. If you've already gotten to that, that's fine, but I want to walk through it for the rest of you. And that is that by default, SketchUp never looks that great when you try to do exports. And so we will talk a lot in this class about how do you make the SketchUp file look a lot better, and it'll be through a bunch of Photoshop collaging, etc. The problem with SketchUp is not that it's inherently bad at modeling. It's actually very good at modeling. It's quick at modeling. But the end product looks very SketchUp-y. Like you can tell that you made it in SketchUp. So we want to figure out how to get it out of that look into something that looks a little bit more professional. And so we're going to do kind of a preliminary trial run with your house today. And I'm going to walk you through a bunch of strategies for fixing this and making it look a little bit better. And so the first strategy that I want to talk about, and again I have the cube house up here for you to see, is to turn on shadows so that we at least can see what the shadows look like, and we'll toggle them on and toggle them off, but I want to introduce that concept to you. So if I go to the View menu, I can go to View and then Shadows, and we'll see shadows set up for the building. Now, it would be helpful, however, if I specified what time of day and what the shadows actually looked like, or was able to control time of day, time of year, etc. And I can do that by going to Window, and then under, sir. Yes, sorry, they switched it. I'm used to the old version of SketchUp. My mistake. If we come over here and we look at shadows, it's already showing there for me. There's our setting, so we can adjust the time of day and or the time of year. Okay? And so if we wanted it to be, say, today, for example, we could specify, what is it, the 7th. So 11/7. And our time here, if we wanted it to be actually right now, what is it, 10:26 a.m. And that would be what the shadows look like if this existed right here, right now. Okay? I'm going to shift the shadows to be a little bit later in the day just so that we can see what they look like over here. Once I have the general view set up, I'm going to go to something called Scenes over here on the right. And this allows me to save a particular view or a particular scene so that I can go back to it and output again. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the little plus sign to add a scene. And this scene is now called Scene 5. I could rename the scene. If I right-click on it and go to Show Details, I can then rename the scene. So, I don't know, Perspective 01, for lack of something better. Okay? So now it's called Perspective 01. And the advantage here is that as I go through, I can go to different views that have been saved and see those views. It will also save the time of day and the shadows in that particular view. So I have my Perspective 1 view showing. Now it's time to work through and create a set of output files that I'm going to then put into Photoshop. And there is a little helpful tutorial for this. If you go here to SketchUp 4.5, or excuse me, SketchUp 4.4 Styles for Photoshop, it will walk you through exactly what I'm about to do. Okay? So what we'll do is, first off, and actually I should make sure that I follow this the same way so that you guys are following along. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Styles window. And so I'll come over here on the right side, and I'm going to look for something called Styles. And I'll make sure that that is open. Okay? Next, I'm going to select the Hidden Line style, it's right here, from the Default Styles list. So I'll go over here. I'll look for Default Styles. There it is. And I'm going to select Hidden Line, which is right here. Okay, so this is a very basic, just the line drawing. There's no special little ticks on the corners. It's just plain lines, which is what I want. Okay, now that I have that showing, okay, I'm going to turn off my shadows, and I'm also going to turn off the guides and the axes. So let me go back to SketchUp, and I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to uncheck Shadows. I'm going to go to View. I'm going to uncheck the axes. Those are the little red, green, blue lines. I don't want them. And I'm going to, I can uncheck Section Cuts. It doesn't matter. I don't have any guides currently in my drawing either, so I'm not going to worry about the guides. Okay, so here I am in my view. Now I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And I'm going to choose where to save it. So we can go into my live demonstrations for today. This is 123. Let me create a new folder for fall of 2016. There it is. And I like to name this something that's obvious. So I would say Cube House, and then I'm going to do underscore lines for just the basic line drawing. Okay? And then I'll go ahead and click on the Options button. And when I click on that option buttons, you see that by default, Use View Size is checked, which means I'm limited to a certain number of pixels by a certain number of pixels. I can, however, change this view size. I can override it by unchecking this and specifying an actual size. So I could say maybe 3,000 or something like that. Now recognize that if you were going to put this on a big board, graphic board, we would want to calculate the number of pixels by the number of inches at 300 pixels per inch, which is what the printer would print. So 10 inches would be 3,000. So this would print fine at 3,000. If you wanted it to be bigger than that, you'd have to keep doing the multiplication. I think SketchUp is limited to 10,000 pixels as the maximum width, but I'm not exactly sure, so we can double check. They may have updated it. But anyway, 3,000 by 1736 for right now is just fine. I'll go ahead and say OK, and then I'll click on Export. And that builds my first line drawing. And if I went to my flash drive and we looked at it, we'd see that it is just the basic line drawing. Exactly what I saw on my screen is exactly what I'm going to see here. So let's move back into SketchUp, and we're going to do the next part. So we already did the export. Okay, next, we're going to go into the Styles window again, and we're going to look in the Display Hidden Line Mode button, and then we're going to click the Xray button. So I'll walk you through how to do that. So here we are in our styles. Our default style is here. We're going to go to Edit, and we're going to click right here. Hold on a second. Under Face Settings, we're going to click on Xray Mode. Okay? And you can see that when I turn that on, I get a little bit of background for all those cubes that I assembled. Okay? So now that this is assembled, and I've got Xray, so one more time, I started from my basic hidden line view. Let me make sure my axes are turned off and my shadows are turned off, which they are. I'll click on the Edit button, or the Edit tab of the Styles. I'm going to click on the Face Settings, which is right here. It's the brown box. And I'm going to click on the Xray button to get this. Then I'll go ahead and go to File, Export 2D Graphic. And this time, instead of lines, I'm going to call this _Xray. The options, if I were to click on them, are exactly the same as the last time. So it remembered what my options were. So I'll go ahead and say OK, and then I'll export, and now I have the Xray. So let's turn that Xray back off, and then we'll move to the next piece of my exports. Okay? So now we're going to go, we got Xray. We're going to turn off the styles, or excuse me, turn off the edges and profiles. Right? And we're not going to do the guides one, so I'm going to skip ahead. We're going to do the shadows. I don't have any guides, so it's not worth it. So once again, under Edit, okay, I'm going to go to this first button, and I'm going to turn off edges. Okay? And when I do that, the whole model disappears. Okay? That's actually OK, because when I go to View and I check the box for shadows, I'm going to have just the shadows, which is what I want. Okay? I don't want the lines. I just want the shadows. So now that I have the shadows showing, I'll do the same file, Export 2D Graphic, and we'll call this Shadows. The options are still exactly the same, and I'll go ahead and click on Export. So again, that was right here. We're still in Hidden Line. I've moved, instead of on the Face Settings, I've moved to the, what is this one? It's the first one, the Edge Settings. And I've unchecked Edges. And if Profiles was checked, I would uncheck Profiles as well. Okay, so nothing selected. And then I've gone to the View menu and made sure that Shadows was checked to get just the shadows. Okay? So now I have the shadows there as well. Okay? We skipped the one that was the guides because I don't have any guides in my drawing, so it's not going to help much. Okay? So now that we've done that, I'm going to do one more, and that is for a final output that has a little style to it. And this is something that's a matter of personal preference as to whether you even end up using it or not, but I want to introduce you to it as well. So let's go ahead and go to View. We're going to turn off the shadows. We can turn back on the edges. And then I'm going to go back to the basic Styles menu. And this time, I'm going to look for, let me see here. Instead of in default, let's go to maybe Sketchy Edges. And I'm going to look, there's something called Pen Gray that I found is kind of good. Okay? It's a little bit more casual, has some overlapping lines to it. This one works pretty well. The other one that works nicely is the airbrush with endpoints, this second option here. It looks a little heavy-handed here, but when you do the export, it ends up looking a little bit better. So in the tutorial, I say to do the pen gray. Sometimes I do both the airbrush and the pen gray. It depends later on which one looks better. So let's go ahead and do the airbrush. I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And I'm going to call this airbrush. And I'll click Export. And then I'll also do the pen gray down here. And I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And I'll call that pen and export. Okay, you can feel free to choose any of these options. If there's something that looks better to you, by all means, you can pick whatever one looks right to you, and you can try it out and see. So now what I have is I have a folder that has a bunch of individual pieces or different exports of my model. And now it's a matter of bringing them together. So this is going to throw you back to the beginning of the class where we were working in Photoshop. So I already opened the lines drawing in Photoshop, and it's here showing up. I'm going to go to the File menu and then go to Place, and I'm going to drop in, let me see here, the next file, which I did the lines. The next one is going to be the Xray. And I'll go ahead and click on Place. And that then drops the Xray in. Notice that the models line up because I did the exports without changing the view at all. So it's the same view. Every export lines up, which is what we want. I'll go ahead and click OK. But these are on top of each other, but they're not showing through just yet. So what I want to have happen is I want the Clubhouse Xray, or the CubeHouse Xray, to change blending mode from normal to multiply. You guys remember those blending modes way back when? Okay? This is when they really start to come in handy. So now, on the multiply setting, we're seeing through, and we're starting to layer these up. So let me go ahead and go to File, Place, and I'll bring in the next one, which was the shadows, which shows up there. And when I switch the blending mode on the shadows to multiply, right, now the shadows are coming through. So I'm relayering up the drawing with all of these pieces that I just exported. Let me go to File, File, Place, and we'll drop in the airbrush. And the airbrush we will once again change to multiply, and we'll say OK. And then we'll drop in the pen gray as well. Place. Where's the pen? There it is. Place. And we want that to be on multiply. So now everything's showing through. And now that I have everything showing through, I can control what parts are being shown. So the Xray, for example, right, I can turn it on, turn it off, and decide if I want the Xray showing. But I can also control how much of the Xray is showing, because I can adjust the transparency or the opacity. So I could drop the opacity of the Xray down to maybe only 50%. So there's a little bit behind, but not a lot of it. Does that make sense? So this is adjusted by eye. Furthermore, I could decide that, you know what, I didn't like the airbrush. I only really wanted the pen gray because the airbrush was a little too heavy-handed, and I'll just turn it off altogether. Let me modify the shadows just a bit. Okay? We'll work on the shadows here. I'm going to add a new layer and do some dodging and burning. So let me go to Layer, New, Layer. And this is, again, going back to the Photoshop dodge and burn. You see how all this stuff folds back into itself? Right? I made you learn all this Photoshop stuff. Guess what? It comes back. Right? We'll do the same thing with InDesign. Right? We'll do the same thing with Illustrator. It'll all start to fold together. This is the fun part in the semester. Well, maybe not so much for you, but for me it's fun. Right? So let's do a dodge and burn. So remember, a dodge and burn, we're going to change the mode to overlay and check the box for fill with neutral 50% gray. If you forgot, don't worry. We can go back to Photoshop, dodge and burn 1.5, and everything that I'm doing will be listed here. Okay? There's actually a video walkthrough so you can remember. Okay? But it's all right here. Okay, so let's continue back in the world of Photoshop. So I have dodge and burn, overlay, fill with neutral 50% gray. I do want to tie the dodge and burn to the shadows only. so that it doesn't affect the rest of the drawing. So I'm going to click on Dodge and Burn. Control-Alt-G ties the Dodge and Burn layer just to the layer directly below it. So we did that before as well. And so now on the Dodge and Burn layer, we can come over to my dodging and burning. We'll use the burn tools to start. Let's make my brush a little bit bigger. And we're going to selectively darken some of the shadows. So maybe we'll darken the shadow right in there at that crease a little bit. Right, maybe we'll darken a little bit of the shadow right in there. Certainly would be a little bit darker right in there. So we'll darken that up a little bit. Darken that. So we're just adding a little bit more character to it. Right. Darken up that crease just a little bit. Darken down here. Throw a little bit more in there. So you get the idea. So I can really work with this. Remember, I can also flip to the Dodge tool, which would be to lighten. And I could, for example, lighten up the outsides of the shadows here, so they weren't quite so stark. Right? Maybe I want a little bit bigger brush to fade them out just a little bit more, maybe something like that. Okay? So it's just a matter of what looks right to you. Maybe I pushed it a little bit far. The good news is with the Dodge and Burn, we can always turn it off and go back to what we had before, because they're all layered up. Okay? But at some point, there's some combination that feels like it's about right, and that I like the end results. When I'm done with those end results, I'm just going to do a file save for web, and this is the version that I'll post for today's exercise. Okay? This is the very early steps of doing some collaging in Photoshop. The idea here is that you modeled in SketchUp, you did some exports, you compiled them together using the multiply, right? And if you got that far, I'd be happy. Okay? The Dodge and Burn is kind of a bonus, just for practice. All right? I'll show you a bunch more techniques as we go forward. Did this make some sense? All right, so give it a shot. Get something posted for today. And then on Wednesday, we're going to go back in time a little bit. We'll deal with AutoCAD and Illustrator, and then we'll go back forward in the world of SketchUp next week. Are there any questions? Nope? All right.